Hi guys, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to do a tutorial on how to make a Psytrance bass using Serum, and it's gonna sound something like this. So here basically I have a patch for it, but we're going to initialize this patch and then see how we can come close to this kind of a sound. So let's go ahead and say init. Okay, so here is our init patch on Serum. It's just a pretty basic saw wave. I just want to go back and create the saw wave from this wavetable actually. And the first thing you want to do is to turn down the randomizing on the phase. So every time you hit a note, you know, it always starts from the same phase. And you want to kind of get the phase right here. I mean, this really depends on how you want your sound to be. So I just turned down the phase. I kind of like it to start right there. So basically we want to modulate our amp with this envelope 1 because it's hardwired to the amplitude within Serum, and this envelope 2 is going to be modulating our filter. So let's create this modulation for envelope 2 here for the filter. So I want to make this unipolar. It's bipolar right now. Let me go to this matrix. So this arrow means that it's unipolar, and this is, again, you can adjust it to taste. So let's do this, and then we're going to draw in our notes. And the amp envelope, it's got to be something like really short. You can actually fine tune it with this lock, so you can have like a better scaled in view of the envelope you're working with. So we want to get decay quite lower. If you actually hold down shift in Serum, you can get a finer adjustment. So let's draw in our notes. So we're writing this track in G sharp, and I want to actually see 16th notes. And then we're going to create a little bit of space in between the end of each note and beginning of the next one, just so we don't have any clicking issues. And one thing I do is to actually lower the velocity on this to something like 60, and then we still use an LFO tool to kind of sidechain it to our kick. And with the amp envelope, we just want to give it something of a shape like this. So again, the decay has to be like really short. And one thing we don't want in our filter is resonance. So take that all the way down, your phase down, your randomness down, and let's just see how this sounds now. Okay, so what I did over there was basically taking my oscillator like an octave down, and I forgot to open up my modulation source at my filter. So I kind of boosted it up to, let's see, maybe around 75. And I just adjusted these parameters of envelope 1 and 2 to taste, to get like the result that I want to hear. It's something super subjective, so you kind of have to play around with these settings. So one thing I do is to get rid of the fundamental at this note, the first one. As you can see, like Psytrance has 3 notes for the bass line, but the first one kind of gets eaten up by the kick. We want our kick to override the fundamental portion in the spectrum within this range for this specific note. So let's do that. And to do that, I basically use an LFO, and the best way to get rid of the fundamental is to use a sine wave. So basically, if you get a sine wave right here, if you look at these, you will actually realize sine wave is kind of like the exact opposite of our saw wave. So when you put them right next to each other, they kind of cancel each other out. I'll show what I mean in the spectrum here. So basically we want to do a modulation for the amplitude of this sine wave here. So let's apply this LFO to the amplitude of our sine wave. But we want it to work kind of backwards. So we just drop it. It means that it's going to cancel out just the first 16th note, which is supposed to be right here in these two rectangle areas. I'm going to show you this in the analyzer just so you can see and hear. The fundamental will be kind of missing at this note, and the other two notes, it's kind of going to just come back kicking in. So hopefully in that first red area, you could see like it was dropping for a millisecond and then it was just kicking back up. That's caused by, you know, the modulation that we drew over here. So for the purposes of this tutorial, let's call this a day for our Serum sound design part. Now we're gonna go ahead and actually start processing our sound. And the first thing I do before I actually process it within the meter notes is that I actually just bounce this to make them like a, you know, wave file, because Psytrance bass is such like a repetitive, again, we don't want any kind of, you know, meter latencies to mess up with our, you know, either phasing or our sound processing, because then it's gonna cause at least small little details and delays is gonna cause your bassline to be entirely disrupted, and it kind of reflects on the entire song. So let's bounce this before we make any processing on it. So here I'm gonna run you through how I kind of process this bass line. The first thing I did was to add an LFO tool. So it kind of ties back to how we had our, you know, first 16th note in 6th velocity, but we just want to make sure that, you know, we use this LFO tool as kind of like a side chain effect. So the second thing is quadrafuzz, which is something of a super usual suspect in Cubase. And I create 3 bands. I let the last band for transients from waves. So, but for this, let's just hear what kind of an effect it brings. So as you can see, that's it brings, I mean, a lot of distortion. But then again, in, you know, modern Psytrance, the bass line is, to at least to my experience, heavily distorted. And of course you can adjust this to taste. Like I had this on tape first and I kind of switched to the tube and I liked it more. This is definitely a personal preference thing. The next thing is something I did with my kick, and that is to bring like more of the oomph effect on the lower band. So what I did is to tell my compressor, hey, get your reference from these frequencies and expand it within this this range. So let's just hear the effect it brings here again. So hopefully you could hear a difference. It's in the very low end, so maybe it's hard to hear it again in a laptop or something like that. But if you have like a good pair of, you know, headphones, it'll be a lot more obvious. The next thing is the transients. So this is a trick I think that's been used by a lot of producers out there. But basically you just bring this in, and when you bring it, it kind of comes like this. So you just turn off the first 2 bands. So this kind of affects only the mids and highs. So hopefully you kind of felt or heard over there that it brings life to, you know, higher frequencies. And second to the last thing here I did was some EQing. With these nodes, I try to be clinical and find the harmonics within my scale. So I'm writing this track in G sharp and my bass is in G sharp. If you look at D sharp or G sharp, these all belong to minor scale, G sharp minor scale, and I just try to be clinical with it. And the other thing that I want to point out here is again, linear phase, because as I mentioned in my kick tutorial, you don't want to mess up the phasing of your bass. And the last thing I wanted to bring here was Saturn. So you're distorting it again somehow. And here I try to create these bands, but I don't want to do anything on the low end. So I kind of turn it off. And if you look at this, it says 207. The way I did this is actually I wanted to start affecting my mids from G sharp 3, so the third octave. So in Fat Filter products, you can actually go and type it. So if I say G sharp 3, it just takes me to that frequency. And here, I think I said G sharp 7. So if I go G sharp 7, so it just takes you that frequency. Just so you can see what it does, I'll just type G sharp 8. So it takes you that specific frequency. And this, of course, you can do it to your taste. Again, I kept this on linear phase. And the mids, for mids, I use warm tape. I think it brings more of like some sort of like a sub effect. Let's just hear a bit on without. Okay, so we did some processing on our sound, and now what I want to do is to actually link it to a group channel where I can further process it and kind of have it linked to my kick and bass and Psytrance. They cannot be thought separately. So I have a Psy bass extension group over here, and I'm gonna run you through this processing in a little bit. But basically, I just assigned this from stereo out to that Psy bass extension group, which is right here. And now I can actually go to this and then show you show the processing that I done over here. So now, before we actually go ahead and do anything here, I just want to enable my oscilloscope. Just see how our wave looks, our bassline looks with all the processing that we applied to it. So now we can go ahead and get started with our processing within the phase extension group channel. So basically here, what I'm trying to do is to boost some frequencies. So this is again really clinical, this is something that you would have to go through yourself and kind of hear what you're doing. But let's just hear what this did to my sound. Okay, not much going on there, but basically, again, it's just like super granular and it's just like your taste kind of thing. And the second thing is that I want to bring some stereo width to my bass line. I use Melda Series Spread for it. So what this does, basically, it's a phase-aware stereo widening plugin. And I apply this in a super subtle fashion. And yeah, you just gotta be careful with it. If I actually bring my spectrum here again, this time we're going to look at how wide our bass line is. So as soon as we applied the effect, you could see that, our nebula got wider. And actually we got a kind of like a weird sound effect, especially in like the higher end. It was kind of like a zappy sound. We don't want that. We just kind of want to bring some stereo width maybe here, but definitely past 250 hertz. because especially lower end, we don't want to mess with it. So to avoid it, I just bring in a side EQ here. As you can see, I low cut it kind of pretty sharply from about 233, and again the higher part I kind of cut it to. So let's just hear how it sounds again. Maybe you could see over there when we actually applied the EQing, you know, we lost that stereo effect up until 200 hertz, which is something good, and we want that. We don't want anything below 200 to be stereo with our bass sound. Second to last thing we have is an EQ. So basically the way I want my bass to work with my kick is that I want to have more kick on this range. So in the lower ends, I kind of want my kick to be more present, especially in Psytrance bass. I think, you know, you have more presence past, you know, 250 hertz and everything. Even though it's a bass sound, it still, you know, oversees all these frequencies. So what I try to do is to bring a high shelf, and then I use this Q factor here and kind of adjust it to taste, and then just increase the gain until I see a point that I like my bass line to be. So let's just hear what kind of an effect this brings again. Okay, and lastly here, we want to basically align our bass line's phase with our kick. So for that, we use this Voxango plugin. Again, this was something we use with our kick tutorial, and I just want to bring in my kick here again. So I want to see how my kick and bass are kind of aligning, especially on this area, because that's where we have both of them present. So with this PHA 979 plugin, you want to force mono. By the way, when you first open a plugin, it's going to be like this. You just have to force it, and then there's two ways you can adjust your phase. You can delay it, which you don't want because that kind of delays like the entire sound. But yeah, you can get a finer adjustment with phase, and I think I'm happy with what we have right now. All right, guys. So one thing I actually realized when I put the phase changer here, since we forced mono, our bass got back to its mono form. Basically what I'm gonna do is to take this stereo widener and this side EQ to go after our phase corrector. And now our bass should go back to having that stereo width to it. But also it's got, you know, its phase fixed. And since this plugin is phase aware, it's not gonna change anything. And also here, we have linear phase, so you're not changing the phase after we fix it. So, and the last thing I wanna show you is kind of how you tie your kick and bass. We did something similar in our kick tutorial. If you go to our Can-Be master group, so what I did over here is that I had an extension bus for my kick, and then I have an extension bus for my bass. So I basically route these two into another, like a master bus, which I call Can-Be master group. And then over here, I do, so we add some basically saturation with Saturn, and this kind of helps, you know, gel the two together. So let's just hear how it sounds, and then So as you could hear over there, it brings some more presence to the lower frequencies and the sub. And last thing I did here is to actually increase that with some EQ, and this is definitely something that you can adjust to taste. But let's just hear again how this sounds. So one thing I realized with my LFO tool and how I kind of sidechained it was that maybe I made this a bit too strong to the point where I cannot almost hear my first 16th note. So I'm going to fiddle around with this a little bit and see if I can actually bring more presence to my first 16th note of my bass. Let's check it out. Yeah, something like that will do for our purposes now. Alright guys, that's pretty much it. That's my process of how I design my bass, how I sound process it, and then how I mix it with my kick in general. Of course, it's gonna be different for, you know, every key that you're writing your basses in. Like maybe your EQing is gonna be different, but you know, the process may stay the same, your chain may stay the same. Hopefully it was helpful to you, and thank you for watching this tutorial. I'll see you next time.